Hi, everybody. This is Eden of Light Cycle Astrology. Welcome to the channel. I am a practicing ancient Hellenistic Western astrologer or traditional astrologer. And this week we are taking a look at Mercury forming a square to Jupiter in the sky. This is the week of February 17th through the 23rd, 2025. You may have noticed that I did not produce a video last week, and that's because I had planned to talk about the full moon in Leo that was in square to Uranus and how about things coming to culmination, perhaps in a surprising way. Well, the thing that came to culmination in an extremely surprising way is that my partner, Kate, went into labor 5 weeks early, and we had to go to the hospital, and it's been a wild ride ever since. Baby is doing really great. We had a beautiful baby girl, and she's super tiny, but she is in the NICU trying to put on some weight so that she can come home. And Kate's over there with baby Annabelle, and I'm taking care of everything else back here on the homestead. So it's been pretty wild. And I just wanted to get into a quick astrology video this week because I didn't want to miss 2 weeks in a row. Now, when I took a look at the charts throughout the week, there was a few different things that were really interesting. There's a Mars stationing to turn direct this week, and Mars is slowing down, which is really cool. But one of the things that really stood out was a square that forms between Mercury and Jupiter. Last week, at the end of the week, I believe it was Mercury that entered the sign of Pisces, a sign traditionally known as the planet's depression or fall. And then Mercury post Cazimi enters a sign where it has very low dignity and then is recovering from the combustion or being invisible under the beams of the sun past the Cazimi and is in recovery but in bad condition. So that's a really interesting thing. And then all of a sudden it moves into a sign where it has mutual reception with its host lord Jupiter and forms an actual degree-based square to the host lord. So that's really fascinating. Now, Mercury, as we're going to see here in a second, is heading towards Aries, going to head back into visibility and will make a nice recovery in the sign of Aries where it picks up dignity and is visible and is ahead of the Cazimi, out of the retrograde, and so on and so forth. But this square that we get this week is really fascinating, and I wanted to talk about this for a second here on the channel. We'll pull up the real-time clock here in a second and take a look at the timing of this aspect, which is rather brief, but I think because of the mutual reception, the whole sign reception between these two planets is going to play out, I think, even quite a bit longer after the actual aspects. So we'll take a look at that here in a second. Before we get into it, though, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos. Leave some comments in the comment section. I really have a fun time if you guys tell me stories in the comment section because it helps me see the different ways that you guys have these archetypal energies showing up for you in your lives. It's a great teacher for myself and anybody else who is fascinated by the way that astrology works in our lives. You can find me at lightcycleastrology.com if you're interested in a reading as well. All right, well, let's pull up the real-time clock and take a look at the timing of Mercury's square to Jupiter this week. Now, I've taken everything out except for Mercury and Jupiter to keep it simple. So you'll see here as the week opens, February the 17th, 2025 on Monday, here's Mercury just about ready to enter a square to Jupiter. Mercury about 6 degrees into the sign of Pisces. And if we roll the real-time clock forward by, well, really Tuesday, I have this title set that says Wednesday on it, but late Tuesday, definitely by the morning of Wednesday, depending on where you are, Mercury begins to engage Jupiter by square. And then if we go to Thursday, February the 20th, this aspect perfects. So this is perfecting right around 8 p.m. GMT time, London time here. And then it is going to be separating beyond that 3 degrees by about Saturday. But, and you'll see this here, the line goes away. There we go. But because Mercury is in Jupiter's sign and Jupiter is in Mercury's sign, this is one of those more interesting aspects that we get because each planet is a host to the other, and each planet plays a host and a guest relationship with the other. So they're sort of like pals in a certain way. There's a sort of kind of we're together, like almost like the odd couple together or something like that. Um, and this, if we get rid of the if we get rid of the clock here, this is going to bring us into our five themes where we're starting out with some things that you may notice or some themes that stand out, as it were, that have a relationship to this kind of powerful mutual reception between these two planets. So, the first thing that I want to share is that one thing I've already noticed as soon as Mercury entered Pisces is that certain things became really like glitchy or on the fritz, right? Internet going out, my phone battery dying weirdly and not recovering, all kinds of things. Weird communications and just odd things happening, cars breaking, all kinds of things that that are under the umbrella of a mercurial archetype, right? Cars breaking down, problems with phones, computers, internet, networks, budgets, investments, bank accounts, tickets, money, medical records, etc., etc. I actually watched an astrology video, and in the chat there was a debate over Mercury being Mercury being the quote unquote brain, and Mercury being the mind or whatever. Yeah, Mercury, the brain and the mind, sure, but we have to remember that Mercury was a planet so close to the sun. It's the closest planet to the sun, and ancient observers noticed in the sky that Mercury was always just really close, always circling the sun. And they imagined or had a spiritual equivalent for the sun as kind of like the soul. And so Mercury was thought of kind of the messenger that was sort of collecting up and staying rather close to the soul, and like receiving and dispersing messages, or taking the souls, like the psychopompic um, mail to those that the soul is trying to connect with, or something like that. So anything that has that tight back and forth, the exchange of markets or money, even like highways or transportation, is a kind of mercurial thing. But also we have medical records and things like that. Now, one thing that we need to sort of break down in terms of dignity, why is Mercury depressed in the sign of Pisces? Well, it's because that if you think about the sign of Pisces, where the planet Venus is said to be exalted or lifted up high, we can think of an exalted planet kind of like a movie star, where because the movie star has a kind of special status within society, that affords the movie star a kind of easy life, as it were, because that movie star carries with him a kind of him or her a kind of high esteem by everybody around. So the red carpet is sort of rolled out. That's kind of like an exalted planet. But here with Mercury in a depression place, or a depressed or fallen place, it's a little bit like the opposite. Well, what is like the opposite of like a movie star? Maybe something like I don't know, like let's say like a lawyer that nobody likes, or something, like a lawyer that's in the courtroom and they're representing the like dirt bag or something, that like nobody likes uh likes the lawyer. Nobody likes, everybody's pretty sure the guy is guilty, but somebody has to represent the guy. And if you're that lawyer in the courtroom, you don't have a high esteem. You're sort of looked down upon, and the judge isn't likely to give you a lot of favors. The jury isn't likely to sort of come back on your side or hear out your arguments. That's Mercury in Pisces to some degree. It's a way where mercurial things are somehow. It's like, because the esteem is low, they're not likely to be heard out. You're not likely to sort of. There's no red carpet rolled out for you, right? You're kind of like a thief in the midst of the judicial system, or something like that. You don't have high esteem. You don't have high status. There's something quite low or poor or poverty stricken about you. And you're sort of meant to sort of try to raise above that. But it's hard because you don't have the status or the recognition or something like that. So you think about how does that work in a Mercury square Jupiter where things are potentially on the fritz? Well, it's because Mercury is things are sort of breaking down on one level for Mercury, not having that high status or high recognition. So things are already troublesome. So, for instance, if you've been neglecting to maintain your car or something like that, this could be a time archetypally where you see that, wow, that sort of fallen maintenance, that record, that due diligence of taking the car to the mechanic and making sure the thing. And I'm very much guilty of this. This is a time where you could see the problems sort of breaking loose at this point and being like, okay, the system is sort of broken down, and as a result becomes like, on the fritz, and all of a sudden you have to fix it or something like that. Now there is this square to Jupiter that we have to factor in. What is that about? Well, interestingly enough, a square to Jupiter might actually be a beneficial thing here. Jupiter as a benefic planet might it might be that one thing or theme that we notice as a standout is that, sure, there's all kinds of technical things or problems, or things are falling apart in on some level, and there's the need to sort of tackle those problems and try to fix things. But Jupiter may be a testimony that things end up working out better. Like if your car breaks, maybe you don't want to, but you end up getting another car and it's somehow a better situation, or whatever it is. But um, with Jupiter as part of this aspect, it may be that though there are challenges arising on a technical level, somehow things work out for the best in the long run, perhaps. And this is as a sign of successful conclusions because of the testimony of Jupiter here being in square. Now, one thing that we're going to also take a look at quite a bit with this particular aspect is that Jupiter has a tendency to overlook the details in the sign of Gemini. And there can be a kind of hubris or thinking one is too wise, takes for granted the kind of actual data or facts that are necessary to really know what's going on. Maybe being cavalier, I think, is a really, really good word for Jupiter in the sign of Gemini at times. Just thinking that you've got a handle on knowing what you think is the correct information, but sort of not really knowing it, kind of simply taking too broad of a move over the details and just sort of assuming that you understand what's going on, when in fact you may have just sort of been cavalier about the whole thing, right? Something like that can be part of this as well. Okay, let's go to theme number 2, which is big learning. This is also going to be a huge, huge theme that I think goes along with this week's astrology. Big learning. Mercury square Jupiter in these signs lends itself to the kind of moments that bring dynamic change or crisis in perspective or wisdom, right? Jupiter, we're thinking about Mercury and Jupiter. You get perspective and wisdom with these two planets. There is a kind of knowing around, there's a kind of growth around knowledge or wisdom that challenges us and probably feels something like growing pains. For example, what are the higher values we want to base living on? And are we learning what those are, even if we thought we already knew? That, I think, comes a lot with this. When you think you have something nailed down, I know what I'm doing here. I know what my values are. And then all of a sudden, this square comes along and says, are you sure? Well, things begin to be thrown into question. Chaos enters in where we thought we knew something. And there's a kind of almost discovery process where it's like, wow, maybe I lost sight a little bit about what I was doing just because I got too busy or something like that. And there may be a kind of emergence of, okay, this is where my moral compass lies, or maybe there are new values that are even coming in that I'm learning about. Wow, this is something that I really want to include in my life that I haven't, that is almost eye-opening in a way that brings a kind of remaking of values on some level. You could see that, I think. Sometimes this may have to do with our children, medicine, news or information, media, and coherence of community. These are all in here with this. This may be a time where we choose to believe, contrary to the facts, quote unquote, that the media tells us is true, for example, because inside we feel a different sentiment. So, Mercury in Pisces can be about the mind as it connects to sentiment, the feelings, the emotions, the empathy, the sort of watery intuitive pools, right? Mercury is sort of operating with this kind of intuitive um fluctuation of light patterns that are less rational and far more kind of in that um uh sentiment, right? It's perhaps getting diving into something romantic or sentimental or feeling based. You know what I mean? Um, and if, for example, um, Jupiter in the sign of Gemini, uh, a sign where Jupiter is in the sign of its detriment or contrary, Jupiter may decide that the wisdom or the body of information, it may represent a kind of believing in contrary information to the system. So, for example, I use this as like the news has this sort of big systematic wall of like they seem to always agree on one thing, right? So if something happens, you go from channel to channel to channel, and they're all saying they're using the same words, the same language, and they're telling you this narrative on the news, right? This is happening a lot just as of late, but I think this could be a moment where people sort of notice that it's like, well, I don't know if I really want to believe the narrative, right? I'm not sure that what I feel sentimentally, intuitively with Mercury and Pisces is in a kind of on the same page with what this big giant system, Jupiter and Gemini, this big giant informational media system is trying to tell me is the facts, right? That's interesting. I think that overall we do see that a lot nowadays, but I think that that could be something that a lot of us find more of, or we experience more of that kind of thing. Um, right. What are the values we base morality on in a way that we live our lives? And is there the need to course correct? This is all part of the big learning, but for some reason, there is this need to sort of experiment or take a look at learning and wisdom and knowledge, and things are perhaps thrown into question, things are perhaps being discovered, things are perhaps questioning things in a very contrary way, maybe even a rebellious way on some level, and it's like we have to re-qualify or examine the kind of beliefs that we have held or are going to be um, holding as personal values, if that makes sense. Big learning in a way is something that you could look for, I think, for sure. Okay, let's jump into theme number 3, which is going to be order and chaos. These are all kind of related, of course. Order and chaos, making order where things are falling apart. We think about Jupiter in the sign of Gemini. We have Jupiter in Gemini. We have a planet of order, Jupiter, and we have Gemini, a sign that is responsible for dismantling the light at the time of the summer solstice, where from spring to the end of Gemini, we have the light rising in the sky. It's the sign Gemini, that double bodied sign, that begins to dismantle the light. And so Mercury is a god that dismantles things. So we have a dismantler god and a sort of cohesive God, and they're in square, they're in attention with one another, and they're in mutual reception. So they're receiving each other. So chaos is receiving order, and order is receiving chaos, right? Jupiter is perhaps trying to order things that are broadly becoming dismantled. And you could even say that this may be dovetailing with interjecting chaos into an area that are areas that are cohesive and perhaps need change, right? So Mercury in Pisces may be sort of interjecting a kind of chaos into the order that already is there on some level. really dynamic chaos and order coming together, supporting each other somehow. Where do we need to potentially um, create order where things are falling apart? And where do we potentially need to stir things up in areas where there is something already cohesively established that needs to find a dynamic change on some level? Here we have dynamic tension around learning, teaching, execution of techniques and skill, and uh, perhaps what we think or know that we believe in. All right, so that is um, theme number 3, I believe. Yeah, okay, number 4 is going to be the right eyepiece, focus, and skill. This is um, one that is um, about the dignity of these two planets where they are. The right eyepiece, I sort of imagined that if you've ever, I don't, probably not a lot of us have looked through the eyepiece of a telescope and trying to find a star or a planet to look at. But for just for people that haven't, it's quite difficult. You set your telescope up, and depending on what you have, right, and maybe you have a telescope that finds it for you or whatever, but there's a lot of times if you look through a telescope, there's this thing, or even binoculars, people have probably experienced this, where you hold them up and you see something before you hold it up. But when you hold it up, you no longer have this easy way of finding something, and it takes some effort to find it. That's a lot like this square. With Jupiter and Gemini, we can easily have information overload, right? There's just, we're zoomed in so much, or we've laid out so much information that we just become overloaded. There's so much news, there's so many choices, there's just so many channels, so many stories and events and world things happening all the time. In astrology, sometimes people use a lot of symbols. They just pack the chart full of symbols. They've got asteroids, they've got outer planets, they've got Aramaic parts, they've got traditional planets, it's aspects and semi aspects, and it's like you're just looking at this thing, right? And it's overwhelming. Jupiter and Gemini can be like that, where we can easily get a kind of information overload. But with Mercury and Pisces, technical or literal processes may be obscured by sentimental or the romantic beauty of things. So the trick here is to use skill and good technique to create the art while not bringing too much technique that makes it hard to create anything of quality. Kind of like the jack of all trades who can do a lot of things but has no specialty and does none of any of them all that well or with like a high quality, right? One of the other, on the other hand, we can lose sight of the importance for doing things like dotting the I's or crossing the T's with Jupiter and Gemini. So, for example, you're in the market and you're buying a new car because your old one broke down, and there you are standing at the dealership. So, when you're there, do you buy the car on sentiment? The one with the beautiful, stylish, kind of the car that you see and it really gets your juices going. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's the car I want to get. Or do you go home and it's like a deep dive into a car consumer world of research and you sort of research yourself into a kind of oblivion until you have no idea what you should buy? Well, if you buy the car you love, you risk buying something that doesn't work out or is not a great car on some level. But if you buy the car that is smart based on the research, how do you even know that you've done correct analysis and research? What if you get it wrong? What if you base your decision on that and you think it's the right information and it's not? And then all of a sudden you don't even love the car. So you have risks on both sides of this, but this is kind of the energy that you get. Very easy to overlook something because you're too zoomed in, and very easy to um, sort of discount skill on another level and sort of say, we don't, just do what emotionally feels good. And it's very easy to just include a lot of information until you're just so blown out that you're sort of paralyzed by trying to what is it? Paralysis by analysis. You just have too much stuff going on, too much information, and it becomes real fritzy, and all of a sudden your mind just doesn't know what to think. That can really happen with this. So the right eyepiece focus and skill, the balance and the tension with the Mercury square Jupiter aspect is in these signs is really, I think, you going back to the telescope analogy, you have to use the right eyepiece. You can't use the the huge one that just like zooms way in, because you're going to have a really hard time finding that little dot in that super zoomed in eyepiece. But if you're not focused the right way, if you're not applying the right amount of skill, right? Enough skill, but not too much skill. Enough focus, but not too much focus. Enough zoom, but not too zoomed out. It's kind of this trying to find the balance between all of these things. So Mercury in Pisces, I'll read this one more time. Technical or literal processes may be obscured by sentiment or the romantic beauty of something. We may lose sight of something rationally because we're sort of enthralled with the romantic idea of something, but we can also just include overload information and technical stuff. And then where's the beauty and the art in that, right? Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. And number 5, okay, is going to be number 5 is going to be running into disregard. This has to do with Mercury being in depression again. An exalted planet is like a movie star through the world, operating through the world with greater ease because of the higher esteem that other people afford them. In contrast, a depressed planet may be like a lawyer that nobody likes because he has the job of defending the dirtbag in the courtroom, or perhaps he is the thief being looked down on by the jury and the judge in bad regard, which will give him a disadvantage. Something like that here with Mercury. So people are not likely to believe or to listen to him because of the regard that people afford that lowly looked down on person, right? So with Mercury and Pisces square Jupiter, similar themes might appear where somehow certain ideas or expression, articulations that we're making, skill, investments, some of these things may seem to be regarded poorly by someone considering themselves to sort of know more than you, or be righter than you, or have more wisdom than you. Now, the rub can come in, though, if somehow there is tension here that feels kind of unfair because the other person may be judging you and thinking that they're right, when you know that there may be perhaps overlooking the details or the facts. So it may feel like you're met with a kind of arrogant or cynical or cavalier attitude from somebody that is affecting the way they don't want to hear you out, or something like that. So a kind of broader way of this would be to say that it's potentially easy for miscommunications, or your intentions to get sort of misunderstood, and for there to kind of be maybe a disregard, or perhaps even a disagreement, because there's uh, there's the potential for arrogance and cavalier um, ways of approaching listening, and maybe not even potentially like a lot of skill in the way that we articulate. So when you get these things mutually coming together like that, when you get maybe that somebody isn't really articulating something very clearly, and another person just doesn't want to take the time to really understand or listen because they think that they're smarter or whatever. It's like that, right? Give you an example. I've been learning about um, vaccines, and there are vaccines that are called adjuvant vaccines. And with baby Annabelle, I've been trying to talk to medical people about adjuvant vaccinations and try to understand them. And I get this a lot. I get this kind of like the doctor plays that role of like, well, I'm the doctor, I know better. And I'm just saying, well, I don't know it all, but I want to find out. And you're the person I'm trying to ask. But there is kind of this, it's a tense topic. It's, it's not a topic easily approached, and it feels rather tense sometimes, even though my intention is just to learn and understand. So we can run into that a little bit with this theme number 5, kind of running into a kind of disregard with Mercury and low dignity here in Pisces. Um, I guess just try to be patient if you feel like you're sort of running into um, things that are getting, lost in translation, miscommunicated, running into disregard or disagreement, because it's probably likely that it's just hard right now for everybody to sort of understand the finer nuance of the details, or the sentiment can get lost very easily. So that's something that I would watch out for and sort of be patient with other people around if you notice this. Okay, well, that is what I have for today. I hope you guys found something good in this, and I'm going to get back to baby duties, but next week should have some good astrology coming. I think Mars stationing to turn direct next week is what we'll be taking a look at, and I'm excited for some Mars energy to move forward. So leave some comments in the comment section, and until then, take care, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.